Okay, shall we start? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first seminar in this Louis Cha series on transcultural fandom studies. My name is Dingkun Wang. I'm currently assistant professor in translation at School of Chinese here at HKU. We need to do a little bit rescheduling to let Dr. Ting to present her research first. Our speaker, Dr. Ting is senior lecturer in translation and Chinese studies at the University of Liverpool. Her research focuses on fan translation, translation of queer media text, and translation history. She publishes widely in journals such as Translation Studies, Translation and Interpreting Studies, and Literary Campus, and is particularly interested in the pivotal role of translator in the reproduction and dissemination of knowledge and initiating social changes. Her ongoing AHRC-funded project, Translating for Change, Anglophone Queer Cinema and Chinese LGBT plus movements, explores new ways of visualize subtitling practices by Chinese queer fans and how Anglophone queer culture has been translated into Chinese in films. So let's welcome Dr. Hu.
Well, first, thank you, Dingkun. Thank you for bringing me back to Hong Kong after so many years away because of the pandemic. I'm really pleased to come back and see the city again. I think it's as new and as energetic as before. I think from your introduction, it's very clear that I'm not a media studies scholar. So everything that you talk about, there's the keywords keep coming is translation. So yes, my background is translation studies and approach fandom from a slightly different perspective because more focused on fans translation practice. So today, the title of my talk is Economies of Visibility, Fandom and Transnational Queer Feminism. And I think before I start, really I should explain the definition of what do I mean economies of visibility. So the term I didn't create by myself, but initially comes from Robin Wigman's book, American Anatomies. So in this book, he discusses the visual bodily inscription in the representation of bodies as kind of commodities in cinema, television in the pre and post civil rights era in the United States. So for Wigman, the economies of visibility refers to the epistemology of the visual that underlines both race and gender, the process of corporeal inscription that defines each as a binary, wholly visible affair. And drawing upon Foucault's argument on how visibility can manage and control bodies by assuring the automatic function of power, Sarah Barnett Weiser further developed this notion in her discussion of how gender inequality is now understood through an economic context, and feminism is also articulated and performed in the economy of visibility. So this economy, as she argues, increasingly structure not just our mediascape, but also our culture and economic practice and daily lives, and have now fundamentally transformed politics of visibility because visibility itself has been absorbed into the economy rather than a route to politics. So visibility is not really a new topic in the discipline of translations, in the discipline of translation studies where I've come from, and it has been approached from different perspectives. So for example, many feminist translation study scholars have long been invested in studying translators' agency in the politics of visibilities, which usually describe the process of making women as a political category more visible through translation, because women has been historically marginalized in various texts, especially in literature. Yep, I understand that. And also as Louis von Flotow, everybody know the very famous feminist translation studies scholar, and she argued that in the scholarship on feminist translation, there's a prominent focus on their interlingual, sometimes word-for-word rendering of another culture's text, their representation and dissemination in a post-Anglo-American and European feminist world. With a transnational approach, emphasizing the ethical role of translation has in facilitating cross-border and cross-linguistic alliance between women, which challenging prevailing hegemonies and regimens of oppression operating in neoliberal society. So here, visibility take on their political valence with the hope of resulting social and political changes. While this focus on the politics of visibility in translation are no doubt valid and also important, it does not capture the complexity and diversity of queer and feminist text produced and circulated in the transnational networked and media saturated world now, especially the world right now is permitted by advanced capitalism. And in place where homophobia and also political repression are significant, for example, in China, pursuing this kind of visibility can be not just dangerous, but also counterproductive in terms of social progress. And also the growing visibility of gender and race around the world is not just the response to the political demands for changes, but also to industrial and technological changes. Internet, particularly social media, has expanded the accessibility and diversity of queer and feminist text around the world and transformed how these texts are consumed and how they're changing our understanding of ourselves and the others. While queer identity and feminism are becoming more and more visible through these changes, new tensions and interdependencies have also been generated between political and economic structures, between fans and the media industry. And this is why I think it is important to incorporate this notion of economy of visibility into the discussion of queer feminist translation to gain a more nuanced understanding of gendered category reproduced under transnational conditions. While it is worthwhile to note here that notions such as fan and fandom have been increasingly expanded and contested, with the term fan being used as a label by the industry to describe its consumers, and by individuals to participate in an alternative social community or self-identify with the value expressed by a public figure or an object. So here, I consider those who self-claim themselves as fans, and fandom as effective bound with the text, as well as a fanish use of cultural products to engage with and reflect on our own lives, as if Sokovsky-Sedgwick in an essay called Queer and Now reflected on her trajectory in queer studies. So she said, I think that for many of us in childhood, the ability to attach intensely to a few cultural objects of high or popular culture, or both, objects whose meaning seemed mysterious, excessive, or oblique in relation to the codes most readily available to us, become prime resources for survival. We needed for there to be sites where the meanings didn't line up tightly with each other, and we learned to invest those sites with fascination and love. Exploring those sites where the meanings didn't line up tightly with each other opens up a number of intellectual and affective possibilities which allow one to reconsider or deepen their understanding of their own experience. This might take place in thoughts, in diaries, in fan fiction, or fan art, or in translation, as I will demonstrate in my discussion of my case study. So there's a lot has been written on queer fandom, and gender and sexuality have been present in fan studies since the early 1990s. Further complicating the discussion of queer fandom, as Eve Nam and Julie Levin-Rousseau notes, is the fact that some work from film studies looks at queer audience and how they make queer reading of text where queer topics have been hidden or censored, such as the Hays Code area Hollywood films. Claire Watling also made a similar argument that lesbian viewing practice are what make lesbian films, rather than necessarily any overt lesbian representation in the film itself. And this sort of audience-focused reading demonstrates the ways in which viewers make meaning of films, which feels similar to the meaning-making practice among fans. At the same time, queer fans are also aware that some media companies present text as potentially queer to get a queer identifying audience to engage with them, but without having overtly queer characters or storylines, which is a practice known as queer baiting, that acknowledge a queer audience while at the same time undermining queer representations. Translation can, for example, be a very useful way for fans to reveal the queer subtext or insert new queer readings into the original text to resist the problematic representation imposed by the industry. This is especially the case in places where queer media is censored. For example, as Danmei adaptation in China, which is the focus of my case study in this paper I will discuss later. So let's talk a little bit about Danmei. I'm assuming many of you here are familiar with it. So Danmei, also known as boys' love in English or yaoi in Japanese, it refers to a genre where the narratives themselves are focused on same-sex relationships between men. Being initially a Japanese subculture, Danmei has become a globally popular, hybridized commodity that is actively being changed and developed as it's appropriated and adapted by consumers across a translational marketplace. So this localizing trends has appeared in many cultural contexts such as Thailand, Philippines, and Malaysia, and also China, and has been imbricated in both globalization and queer culture formation. Although the commercialization of Danmei culture and its transnational distribution have become a growing concern among researchers. While Danmei has been widely read as a critic of patriarchy, its queerness has been essentialized and stylized for political and economic interests. The consumption of Japanese Danmei product in East Asia, for example, has contributed, as argued by Eve Nam, to an imagination of a more modern Japan, conflating nations' mediascape with its ideoscape among overseas consumers, given the fact that in terms of legal protection of gender minorities, including the rise to same-sex marriage, Japan still lags behind many other countries. Although homosexual-themed content are censored in mainland China in mainstream media, Chinese Danmei culture products have gained great popularity over domestic market, with that homoerotic storyline being usually weakened or erased. Some of these products have also been adapted and marketed for global audience as part of the state go abroad strategy for promoting Chinese culture overseas, or without decreeing the queer subtext, but only distributed to regions outside of mainland China. That kind of strategy is called 环中国发行 in Chinese. So both situations are found in the global distribution of 天官赐福. Some of you probably know that. Also briefed as the TGCF, and in English it's called Heaven Official's Blessing. It is a popular Chinese Danmei animation series. Although my case study will focus on the later situation, which particularly referring here about the excluding mainland China distribution, given the limited time I have here. So before I enter into the details of my case study, it's probably necessary to provide a little bit background about this animation, especially for those who are not familiar with Danmei or don't have time to catch up with what's going on in the second season. So this animation series was adapted from a same-named novel by Xiang Tongxiu, a well-known Chinese Danmei novelist. The novel was initially published in series in 2017 and 2018 at Jingjiang Literature site, a popular Chinese platform for disseminating and consuming literary works by amateur writers. So the narrative centered around a romance between two young men, Xie Lian, who was a former prince of Xianle Kingdom before he became a god, and Hua Chen, a ghost king who was also a firm follower of Xie Lian since they encountered each other when Xie Lian was Xianle prince. So the novel was immensely popular among Dai friends and has been officially translated into English and published by Seven Seas Entertainment in 8 volumes, with the first released in December 2021 and the last in November 2023. Although before the official translation comes out, the novel has already been disseminated in 9 languages online while fans translation since 2017, and it enjoys a wide fan base around the world, which has led to its commercialization in the form of anime adaptation, comics, and audio drama. The first season of this anime was simulcast in Bilibili and Funimation in 2020. It was an instant success. In the first months of streaming, it amassed more than 100 million views globally, and also listed in Netflix in 2021 with subtitles in 7 languages and distributed in 36 countries. The second season of this anime was first broadcast in October 2023 at crushingworld.com and Bilibili, which, however, is only limited to Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. But up until now, this anime is still not accessible for anybody in mainland China through Bilibili. So to illustrate how the visibility politics of this anime can be disrupted and countered read by queer fan audience, I will analyze a Chinese fan translated video of 2 Canadian queer fans reacting to the first episode of the second season of this anime. So the 2 Canadian I probably show here. So the 2 Canadian fans featured in the video to be translated by fans are called Victor and their girlfriend Stitch. So 2 of them together self-refer as Stickter. So both of them are self-claimed hardcore TGCF fans, and Tickter, the one without glasses, is particularly influential among TGCF fan community, and they has 124K followers in their YouTube channel on Damai Works, and that channel specifically dedicated to Mo Xiangtong Show's work. So although YouTube is banned in mainland China, many of TikTok's YouTube videos discussing TGCF has actually been translated by Chinese fans and circulated widely on Chinese social media platforms such as Bilibili, including the one that I'm going to talk about. So the reason that Sticker's reaction video was chosen to be translated by Chinese fans is probably initially to do with the accessibility of this anime's second season in mainland China. As we can see, this kind of reaction videos usually have 2 windows. As you can see here, that there's one window showing actually the anime they're watching, but the other one features the fans as reactors. And their reactions are carefully placed in between the pause and replay of the show without overtaking or erasing the audio of the show, therefore providing the latest information about the show that others are eager to know, but also have no access to. So that means by watching this kind of reaction video, you got sense of actually the show, but also you feel like you're watching together with a friend and share their comments on that. So you can see that in the screenshot I got from the video, both windows in the screen are translated with the Chinese subtitles on the top and English at the bottom in each window. Therefore, those who have limited knowledge of the English language can understand both the English dubbed show and also the lesbian couple, the Sticker's conversation in English. So the double layered translation is effective for clarifying the various reactions the lesbian couple has made. For example, they have shock, they have this kind of hand covering mouth to show they cannot believe it. They have love, they have each other kind of making jokes, nudge each other. And it also provide the space for the fan translator to interpret both English dubbing and also the sticker strokes, their reactions. For example, as you can see here, there's one scene setting in the Great Martial Hall where the General Pei Ming accused Xie Lian and saying he has suspicious connection with the Ghost King Hua Chen in front of all the gods, including Junwu, the Heavenly Emperor. Wind Master Feng Shi, he's another god, has seen through Pei Ming's intention. And Feng Shi refuted him and asked back, are you saying Princess Xianle, Xie here, colluded with Ghost King? So the fan translated this line as, 你是想说仙乐太子勾结鬼王? Xie Lian then responded by saying, do I know them? Translated by the fan said, 我认识他吗? A slight different character here. So the them translated by the fans into a rare variant of what we know, the he version of ta in Chinese. But this character have the same pronunciation. But if you're familiar with what is going on about how this word is used in Chinese context, you will know that this character specifically refers to God in the Chinese translation of Bible. And there's a note under the Chinese subtitles explaining them is not them 不是他们，而是作为非二元性别常用代词. So basically means them here is not the plural they, but a common non-binary personal pronoun. So these notes also explain the stickers' reaction in the video because they paused and looked at each other, anonymously spoke out the word and shout, damn, as well as the stickers follow-up comment say, James Chick. James Chick is the English dubber for this line. And he also write the subtitles by himself, rewrite a little bit. So they shout, James Chick wins every word to every word ever. So the additional information on the non-conventional use of the English word they, them, provided by the fan translator here is clearly appreciated by the audience, the other fans, and also encourage the audience to pay close attention to the nuanced use of personal pronoun and the queer visibility of the English dubbing. For example, one fan immediately comments, 没有直接用 he. So he's saying like the English dubbing didn't directly use he in this case. As you can see on the top of the bullet subtitle on the top of the screen. And there's another audience point out immediately that the Wind Master Feng Shi, who is actually a man, but also known to like to be transformed into a woman, was referred as she or her in the English dubbing, which also sparked a discussion among fans in Damu in their bullet subtitles about the gender-free Chinese third personal pronoun, ta, ta, in pronunciation, and why the use of she actually fits better with Wind Master, and also clarify later Xie Lian's confusion when he later encountered the male version of Wind Master. This discussion is very interesting, not because it exemplifies how translation helps develop a fan's sensitivity to gender-inclusive language, but also demonstrate how queer visibility expressed through explicit reference to non-normative sexuality and gender in English dubbing can be mediated, but also at the same time highlighted in the Chinese context through fan translation. The mediation is likely attributable to China's censorship on homosexual-themed content, including specifically Danmei on Chinese social media platform. While homosexuality is no longer considered as illegal since 1997, it is still a sensitive topic subject to strict surveillance and being targeted in the government several cleansing campaigns aiming to crack down obscene content in the past decades. The responsibility policy that Chinese government recently carries out has also forced Chinese internet intermedia, for example, social media platform, to assist this censorship, making it difficult for Chinese Danmei audience and fans to discuss or post anything explicitly related to homosexuality, especially given the explicit ban on dancing media adaptation in 2021. So to avoid this kind of being censored, Chinese Dame fans has already developed coded form of expression. For example, some of you probably know this, 社会主义兄弟情, socialist brotherhood, to engage with their favorite text. So although the variant character ta hasn't become a widely accepted code for non-binary personal pronoun among Chinese fans, its rare use in modern Chinese language makes it prominent in the translation, attracts attention, and inviting further interpretation from viewers. Similar practice can be also found in the translation of the sentence. For example, there's a line in the video by the line was spoken by Stickler saying the gay hit like his villainous like to basically describing Junwu, the heavenly emperor's action and his tone. Rather than leave the English word gay untranslated, a widely accepted practice within Chinese LGBT community, or replacing the English term with 同性恋, the established Chinese translation for homosexuality. The fan here translate the sentence into 他那种给力给气的坏水. So 给力给气. Basically, the line says he's that kind of gayish villains, in which the word gay is transliterated as gay. Gay is the Chinese character like give. So some of you probably know this. 给力给气 is an expression recreated from the Chinese idiom, for example, 痞里痞气. It is right now a buzzword in Chinese popular culture, referring to a man's non-masculine gay-like behavior. So this indirect translation of non-normal gender and sexuality are part of the fan translator strategy of getting their translation past the platform's screening, but also avoiding attracting unwanted attention from the censors on the one hand. On the other hand, they also mirror the playfulness of fan translation in creating coded language to circumvent censorship and engage with the community, because you're using the language that you think your peer will understand, will fan about it. So as the fan review in their replies to other comments after under the post of this video, they also show that they had so much fun when watching the sticks in this video, and so they want to reproduce this kind of fun, 有意思, make their translation as fun as the original source. Therefore, they deliberately add several punchlines in their translation. So if designing the punchlines as part of the enjoyment that fan had when translating this video, another important part is to share their pleasure in reading the Sticker's queer interpretation of Junwu, as I mentioned, the Heavenly Emperor, his father's son bound with Xilian in this episode. And this queer pairing seems to be very, very new and unexpected to Chinese audience, with many of fans starting to asking, is that true? Are you kidding me? To express their enjoyment in reading this interpretation. The fan translator clearly predicted these readings and provide a lot of details to highlight and explain this kind of oblique lines in the English dubbing. So for example, as you see in the screenshot here, there's a scene when Junwu said he has built a new temple for Xilian so he can have a decent place for his followers to worship him. And the sticker were extraordinarily excited and shouted, oh no, because the English dubbing used erected rather than built. So build a temple, but they didn't use build, but used erected. So to explain the sexual connotation of the English word to those who do not understand it, the fan translator not only underlined the English word, but added a note in red color explaining, hey, erect 除了有建立的意思外，还有勃起的意思。The word erect, apart from meaning build, but also refers to boner, to call for others' attention. The eagerness of this fan to connect with others and share the excitement can be also see in the commentary section, where they actively engage with other fans. So actually, among the 203 comments on this post, more than 1/3, which is 75 to be exact, are actually these fan translators reply to other fans, and many of which are to echo with other fans' excitement about reading this new queer reading between Junwoo and Xinyue. And it's also among these interactions that more political nuanced discussion, such as censorship, why we need to censor Dame, and the visibility of non-normal sexuality and gender in China should be supported or should be banned or discussed. So, for example, there are some fans who I self-identified as rotten girl expressed their jealousy of English audience who are able to consume such explicit dame reading of this anime. And there's also others reflected on why this reading are possible in English dubbing, and how the global popularity of dame narrative may eventually lead to structure change in China. And for example, there's one review self-identified as 钛合金钢铁直男. He commented that he thoroughly enjoyed the translated sticker reaction video, although he hasn't actually watched the video by himself, watched the anime by himself at all. And he felt that censorship on dame works such as TGCF is unnecessary, especially given that homosexuality has existed in Chinese society for long. And it's also part of Chinese culture that needs to be represented and understood by others. His comments clearly made an effective connection with the fan translator, who respond literally within 10 minutes, which sounds a long time, but actually not online, expecting you are talking to strangers online and you don't know anybody or whenever they're going to respond. So the fan translator confessed how touched they were, especially for the fact that the commenter, the audience, they're actually from a different audience. They're not LGBT community at all, but they understand and also supporting the fan translator, which is obviously from LGBT communities. So while there's a lot of interesting details I want to share with you about this video, and there's more example I can give about how fans translate queer media text, I'm aware of the time, so I will wrap up my talk by going back to the issue of visibility in popular queer text. So as demonstrated in my case study, the global distribution of Chinese dame text has clearly been shaped by the economy of visibility tied to neoliberalism. Although its distribution may play a positive role in de-Westernizing the Anglo-American dominated global queer media market, it does have the risk of reinforcing the stereotyped queer identities and reproduce the existing asymmetry, political and economic structures. But what is interesting to see is how transnational links within fandom enable fans to disrupt and problematize this commodified visibility, and how translation can be used as a way to strengthen and also expand those links. Equally interesting is the pleasure and enjoyment fans can obtain in identifying and sharing their affinity with a text. Although much of Sticker's reaction video here is about reading the homosexual subtext in anime, what is kind of emphasized in the Chinese translation is their enjoyment in playing with the text and connecting with others. Of course, at the same time, without being too visible and attract censorship. Navigating between these different visibilities turns out to both a source of fun for the fans, but also a way for others to see the changes need to happen and the solidarity could be formed. If, as Olga Castro and Amek Ernak have argued, the future of feminism is in the transnational, and the transnational is made through translation, then fan translation is surely an important force driving and shaping the development of transnational queer feminism because of its ability, as we see in the case study, of disrupting the capitalist logic and connecting transnational community. But how to capture and theorize this practice within a wider social cultural condition in a specific context takes into account will be the area that future researchers will have to lead on. That's the end of my talk.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Guo. I think we're gonna move on to let Professor Henry Jenkins to talk next to Dr. Guo. Then we will do Q&A after all the three talks. Is that okay? So shall we?
If you could share the screen with me, we'll be ready to go. Okay.
Hi, Henry, I stopped sharing on my side. Could you share your screen?
I'm trying to see what's happening here. Should be coming up, but I'm not sure what's happening here. Why am I not able to share screen? It should just be.
Harry, are you the co-host right now?
I don't seem to be. So
Oh, okay. Can we find a tech person to make sure Henry's the co-host so that he could?
Yes.
Yeah. But we can see
First
your
of-
face perfectly well, so.
yeah, you see me fine, but this I can't show you the PowerPoint images, which are kind of vital here.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
all good.
Oh yeah, would you mind try again?
Yeah, could you try again?
Let's see if this is it. Open system setting. This has not been my day tech-wise.
Yeah, so I enabled everyone to share the screen, so it should be fine.
Well, are you seeing my? Part of it is that this is coming out very abstract here for me. I think this is a new computer. I've done other PowerPoints presentations on it, so it should be okay. Does anyone know under system preference what I need to do?
Unfortunately, I don't, but yeah. Or you could send the slides, share the slides with me, and I can play it on our side.
Okay, so who should I send the slides to? I'm
Kedi,
sorry they
Kedi.
didn't.
It's me.
Kedi. Okay,
It's me,
I
Kedi.
don't, sorry, I'm just not hearing who I'm
No, I know it's
speaking to.
okay. You didn't see my face, so.
Okay, so let me see if I can get to. So I'm gonna hit Kedi. Let's see how quickly we can move this. It's kind of image heavy, so
叫佢係咪 send email 俾你咁樣？
yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. It's just gonna take a second to get everything sent. Okay, so move this out of the way so we can. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get everything. I'm trying to get the presentation in a form that we can send it. Maybe too big to email.
That could be true, but
That's what I'm trying to see.
is that a Google Slides or?
What I think I'm gonna try to do is put it on Dropbox and then send you a Dropbox link. It's just gonna take a sec.
You have the icon share in your Zoom app.
Yeah, it's not working. I can't really explain beyond that without showing you, but something's seriously off here. So it'll just take a minute. It says 26 seconds left to get this in the Dropbox so I can send the link to Kedi and we'll be good. So anyway, I apologize to everyone for being so disorganized. I came back from Atlanta to LA without my apartment keys. They were supposed to have been sent to me today and they didn't arrive. So I'm currently speaking from the lobby of my building because I'm locked out of my apartment. And I had to scramble like crazy to just get a setup here that would actually work and transmit things. It's been a little, so you may hear some weird background noises. I
No, it's
apologize.
actually very
for that.
quiet over there.
Hopefully the noise cancellation will solve some of this, but it's a little distracting and chaotic for me as people walk through and with dogs and packages and, you know, all of that as I'm doing the talk. So
Yeah, Henry, very nice to see you again. So while we're waiting for your PPT to come through, how about, as we discussed before, how about let's start by talking a little bit about your current research in transcultural.
yes,
Yeah.
happy to. So, I mean, once we get the presentation up, you'll see some images,
Mhm.
but we started, I have always been someone who studies mostly American culture and American fandom, but I had guests from Shanghai University during the pandemic and we got to know each other very well. And I got invited to go to Shanghai University and teach a course on fandom, Western fandom studies last summer. And while I was there, I fell in love with Chinese fan cultures, especially Shanghai fan culture, which is one of the most intense, vivid, expressive forms of fan culture I have encountered anywhere in the world. And so when I came home, I wanted to create a group that would continue those connections and allow us to study in more depth what's taking place there. Right? It was so surprising to me, some of the things that I was finding, and was particularly interested in that intersection between the dominant media industries in East Asia, Korea, Japan, China, and then the influx from places like Thailand, Vietnam, and India that are also part of that larger structure. So we wanted to study transculturalism as a fan phenomenon. We had a meeting the beginning of the fall and had about 35 people at USC turn up. And we've been recruiting aggressively Chinese students to be involved in our network also. So that we are, you know, when we have a meeting, we've timed it so that it's an equally awkward time for both China and for the US. It is late afternoon for us. It's early in the day for you, but we're having more and more students sit in join the meetings and become part of a large scale collaborative comparative research project. Now the strength in it, last summer, we took 6 of my USC students, we got funding to take them to China, to Hong Kong and Shanghai. We had a conference, Hong Kong Baptist, and we had another one at Shanghai Jiaotao University, where we shared our research with each other. And in between that, we rented a bus and went to a number of fan sites around the city of Shanghai. And we joined you guys for some visits in Hong Kong. So that's where we're at. We now have roughly 12 different research teams studying different aspects of fan culture, with most of which have a national mix of participants. They're not just US, not just China. We're trying to bridge the gaps there and bring people together.
Mhm.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So
So
here
people
you can
coming up.
see
Yeah,
this
I can
first
see myself.
slide shows us some images from the summer, some of the meeting of Chinese and US fans as we traveled around the city to musicals, to Disneyland. There's a picture there of a Star Wars pop-up that we went to in Hong Kong, and the top picture there is me in the Gangnam district of Korea, because we're now recruiting Korean participants as well to participate in the meeting. And next slide. So this is our recruitment, some of the images I took in China that summer. Next slide. So what do we mean by transcultural fandom? The concept is one that we are taking pretty directly from the work of Bertha Chin and Lori Morimoto. Basically, it's the idea of different cultures coming together and forming strong emotional bonds around shared forms of popular culture. So what they talk about is this mix of affinity and of access and affinity. That is, we now have broader access to pop culture than ever before from around the world. And that creates opportunities where we encounter something from somewhere else that speaks to us in a powerful way. Next slide. So I had theorized something like this almost 15, 16 years ago in an article I wrote on pop cosmopolitanism. And the idea is that historically, cosmopolitan was a way in which sophisticates escape the parochialism of their own culture through engagement with fine art, with wine, with opera, so forth, the sort of cosmopolitanism. But today's world, what we're seeing is more and more young people forming that affinity, escaping the confines of their own parochial cultures through their embrace of shared popular culture forms like anime, manga, martial arts films, Bollywood, so forth. Next slide. So one way that this has been theorized more recently is the work of Xinyue and others in Korea have talked about what they call female universalism as it relates to Hallyu and K-pop. The idea that these things both express shared experiences of women under patriarchal society, and that sense of trauma and loss is very powerful in K-dramas and K-films, but also a sense of solidarity and joy, which gets expressed through the K-pop and through dance and the physicality of movement. Next slide. So if you go to, this is some pictures I took at a G-Idol concert in Atlanta, but you see this kind of lush fantasy world, utopian imagery that becomes associated with K-pop. Next slide. And we see dance and coming together and a kind of joyfulness that's part of the experience of K-pop as well. And the way people dress and the ways they behave expresses a step out of the constraints of the normal world and into a kind of imaginary space. Next slide. Here we see some of the fans, and you can just see the intensity of expression on people's face, as well as the kind of lighting that creates a magical glow. Next slide. And we see the light sticks, which are a central part of the ritual of being a fan at an idol concert. Next slide. So I call what creates the preconditions for this is what I call the global shuffle. And we can use Netflix as an example. Netflix is trying to aggressively open markets around the world, but to do so, it has to agree to a certain percentage of co-productions of shows made in those countries. And having made them, they then distributed them through the network. So we're seeing a cultural exchange that doesn't necessarily follow traditional trade routes or geopolitical affiliations that are a new kind of scape, to use a Potterized term, that's shifting our access to media in ways never before experienced. Next slide. So these are some pictures of our trip to China this summer as we've sought ways to engage and learn from, culture. These are all pictures from the Hong Kong leg of our trip. Next slide. So as I mentioned, our research groups are looking at a variety of things. One of them is looking at Genshin impact and the construction of race. And on our trip, we found ourselves at kind of cosplay event around this game, seeing the ways that the races are represented, including this brown face experience here on the far side, which would be almost impossible to imagine in a US context, given our current racial sensitivity, but was not particularly shocking to the participants at the cosplay event. So it tells us something about how race may be experienced differently in the US and China, and being able to do comparative research across them is a really important part of what we're trying to get at in our project. Next slide. We also were able on our trip to China to experience a random playlist K-pop dance event at a mall in Shanghai. And I think our research team are going to be sharing more about that later in the program today. Next slide. We are looking at things like cross-cultural exchanges or translations, to use the term used earlier. So what has been the experience of popular feminist movements around Barbie in China? What has been the relative reading of G-Idol in China and in the US, particularly as it relates to queer sexual identities? Next slide. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about two of our research initiatives. The first is one that I have been working on myself. It grew out of my first trip to China, and it is looking at this concept of what I'm calling imaginary homelands. But I'm also going to talk a bit about pop art, which I'm obsessed with, and make-believe. Now, I should say that as I do all of this work, most of you probably know a lot more about Chinese fandom than I do. I've spent 14 weeks there now researching this. I've been reading what I can get my hands on, but I'm still relatively a novice. So please test my claims against your own experience and speak up if I'm misrepresenting anything that's going on here, because I'm still very much learning from every encounter I have with this culture, but I'm finding it a really interesting to look at. So here is a picture of what I would say a photo op setting. Most of the malls have multiple spaces designed for people to take selfies or have other people take pictures. This was a fan event, and so this young woman is there in costume and surrounded by mostly male photographers who wanted to take her picture in this very romanticized space. And I'm interested in these spaces and what work they do within the culture. Next slide. So I started thinking about this when we went to this park in Shanghai, which has an 85-foot tall statue of Evangeline Unit 1. And this space had been described by one of my students in the course I taught at Shanghai University as an imaginary homeland. And as he said, he and his friends went to this park before they went to shop for manga or when they were going to see an anime in the theaters. And it spoke to them about their fascination with Japanese culture. And so there's an imaginative dimension of it. He writes in his paper for my class, perhaps for ordinary residents, it is just a large decorations, but for fans, it has extraordinary value and significance of breaking through time and space limitations. Like the remains of giants sleeping on the land. This is how I interpret it. So this idea of breaking through time and space limitations is become a really central driver of the work that I'm doing in my project. Next slide. This just gives you a sense of the scale of this giant purple statue. It's not subtle. It's not hidden. It's not, Soviet era's, secret literature. This is very much a celebration of Japan in the heart of Shanghai. Next slide. And around it, you see these smaller statues that represent other iconic figures from Japanese pop culture. It's a kind of court of honor. And I love this little girl in her heart-shaped sunglasses, little princess ordering her two parents about, and really fascinated with these statues. Okay, next. And this is me meeting an old friend. I had been among the first American children to be exposed to Ultraman when it was released in the US. And so when I met Ultraman in the park, I had to pose for a picture because I hadn't seen him in a long time, but he was a central part of my childhood growing up. Next slide. So I'm interested in how we might take this idea of an imaginary homeland in a variety of different directions. And one is to think about the Chinatowns that spring up in American cities across the country, right? This happens to be a lantern festival in Chinatown, LA, which is very close to where I live. So in some ways, these are ethnic enclaves, but they also have a strong imaginative dimension, right? People who may have never been to China, who may be second or third generation Chinese, are coming to these places to learn what Chinese culture is, to buy supplies, food, products, so forth, media that would not be available to them where they might live in suburbia. So they function as a headquarters for Chinese people in Los Angeles. And they are in some ways an imaginary space, not just for the Chinese people there, but also for Americans who go there as if they were experiencing China. And so in some ways, they are also imaginary homelands, both for the Chinese people who are using them and for Westerners like myself who are going there to be in China, at least in a loose sense, and be embodied in Chinese culture. Next slide. Maria Kundura is a Greek woman who was born in Greece. She moved to Australia, then she moved to Canada, then she moved to the US, and she wrote a lovely essay about the role that the show I Love Genie played in those trajections. That is, the genie is a figure in Greek mythology, but everywhere she traveled, this American distorted version of it was there, and it became central to her identity, how she thought about herself. And she says she watches reruns today with the fondness one has when one finds an old toy. And as we'll see, toys play a central role in the research I've been doing. Next slide. So I'm interested then in Benedict Anderson's notion of the imagined community. And here we can see some Irish Americans as they imagine their own community. I think this is on St. Patrick's Day in Chicago. But I also am interested in the imagined community. That is, I don't have a strong tie to a mother country other than the US, but I sometimes imagine myself as part of Hogwarts and a Ravenclaw. I'm a loyal Ravenclaw. I have a banner hanging in the wall of my office. I've often been a Klingon in relation to Star Trek. So these are imaginary identities that we find our affinities draw us toward. And we become part of an imagined community. And finally, we can think about an imagining community that is a community that is actively imagining and reimagining its ties to each other, its civic imagination, the term we do a lot of work with back at MIT, at USC. So the sense is what I'm interested in are these various layers of social and civic imagination and what they might tell us about who we are and how we locate ourselves in relation to things like ethnicity, community, so forth in our everyday life. Next slide. So there's also a growing literature about fan pilgrimage or fan tourism, places like this is the Hogwarts attraction at Universal in Orlando, and it allows fans a lived, tactile, and often deeply moving experience in the physical world rather than in the imaginary. And I would disagree with that rather than the imaginary part, thus strengthening the connection with the story, the characters, and the fictional world. So I was at Night of 1,000 Wizards, which is really closer to 2,000 Wizards, when they invited hardcore Harry Potter fans into that park after closing, after midnight for the first time. And people were falling onto the ground in tears because this was a place they had visited so often in their imagination, a recreation of the film sets. And it felt so tangibly real to them. So they were there physically, but they were also there with their imagination and their memories of earlier moments of imagining Hogwarts. Next slide. This building, so I live in Los Angeles in Blade Runner territory, right? So this is a building, the Bradbury building, which is about 5 blocks down the street from where I am now, was a key setting for Blade Runner. People go there to experience Blade Runner, but it is also a building I walk by regularly when I'm walking through my neighborhood. So for me, it is an everyday familiar space. For someone else, it may be a magical space of the imagination. And Will Brooker has written about this specifically in relation to the stretch of territory near where I live in downtown Los Angeles. Next slide. So those, if we bring those kind of theoretical frames with us, then I'm very interested in what's going on at Pop Mart, which has become this explosive phenomenon, a toy store for young adults. It's not adult toys in the sense of sex toys, but it is not a children's toy either. And so when we go there, we see mostly women in their 20s, and statistically, they're the highest user of Pop Mart as a space. The space itself has fantastical elements in it. This one feels like a spaceship, right? And it's designed to be a space where you go and buy things. New products are being released all the time, but also it's a place to take pictures, to circulate on social media. And so it's designed to be an immersive environment. Next slide. So here we see the kind, people being photographed, people posing for photographs, and the toys are displayed as if they were museum objects. They are in cases to be admired, to be looked at, as well as in the blind boxes that we buy them in and experience them through. And the ritual of the blind box and opening a blind box and taking the toy out has become really a central unboxing ritual in China and the something like 30 countries around the world that now have access to Pop Mart. Next slide. I was fascinated when I was there by all the space and astronaut things. We're coming to realize that I saw more space toys in China than I remember seeing when the Apollo 11 landed on the moon in the 70s, and far more than we see in the US. So in some ways, China and the US are involved in a space race with each other, just Americans don't know it yet. Okay, next slide. And we're seeing, other stores, other character goods stores having similar practices. I'm a big fan of Princesses in the Palace, and have bought multiple sets of toys of the princesses at Koteki while I'm there. Okay, next slide. And as we look at it, I think we're seeing a shift in what nationalism looks like as well. We have there the kind of plaster of Paris bust of old sage Mao that were very popular in the 70s and 80s and early 90s when I first came to China. But I put them next to the figures of the founders of the Chinese Revolution, including Mao, that are manufactured for blind box sale as an extension of the television franchise as an age of enlightenment. And so this sense that the marketing of nationalism in China now includes brightly colored hot young Mao in vivid colors and sensuous vinyl, rather than the kind of colorless official looking version of Mao that was common in the past. Okay, next slide. This fascinated my most recent trip. We went to a pet store where people are able to take out snakes and lizards and small mammals and hold them and so forth. So you're feeling and holding an actual snake, but if you look along the top of the case, there are all these Godzilla, these giant lizards. So even the experience of holding a reptile is translated into a fantasy environment that involves thinking about giant reptiles. And as a Godzilla fan, I thought that was really cool. Next slide. This is a kind of pop-up store around Final Fantasy, where you're inside a game environment and served foods associated with the game as part of a way of just immersing yourself physically into the imaginary world the game constructs for us, for players. Next slide. And there are many such pop-ups, as I'm sure you know, in contemporary Shanghai, and I'm sure in Hong Kong. Many of these places then create bulletin boards where people can post their fan art, where they can send messages to each other, and these become spaces of affiliation, connection for these fans, which makes these kind of home bases, imaginary homelands, all the more vivid for their engagement with them. Next slide. We have this is a whiteboard that people draw on at one of the malls dedicated to the sale of Japanese and Korean cultural products. Next slide. But the scale of our imaginary worlds could be as small as the surface of our phones. So that these are two young women that I met on my first trip to China. They're both hardcore fans. One of them describes herself as a mother fan for a particular bias within a male boy band group. The other describes herself as a sister fan for one of the women, I think, that's in G-Idol. They're very different kinds of fans, but I noticed they had their biases photographs on their cell phone. So I asked them to hold the phones up and take the picture. And they wanted to stress that even though they have different perspectives on within fandom, they like each other, they're close friends, that these different groups can get along. Next slide. So this is an interesting phenomenon. During the pandemic here in the US, when Disneyland was shut down, American fans reconstructed the rides in videos. And we'll play this one for Pirates of the Caribbean. I hopefully play. And it's interesting, these things are constructed as rides, right? They're getting into cars. He's saying, keep your hands and arms in the car at all times, and all the things that you'd be said if you got on a ride, and then it takes off. And they move through their home, but they have artifacts and toys set up and other people reenacting elements from the ride. And dozens of Disney rides were reconstructed in this way at the peak of the pandemic, as people shared these videos with each other. And so the home becomes an imaginary extension of the Disney experience. And those of you who've been on, this is not very much not the Shanghai version of Pirates. This is the Disneyland version in LA. But if you've been there or know the iconography, you will recognize all of the sort of spaces that are being performed here. Okay, so Bobby Schweitzer, who's a performance studies person, wrote about this phenomenon. Here we see shots from another video that represents It's a Small, Small World. And he says the act of make-believe is a form of social imagining in which prompters, such as verbal suggestions and props, are used to figure the imagined object. Household objects are reconfigured in relation to their theme park reference. Desk chairs become ride vehicles, toys and dolls are recruited as animatronics, and souvenirs establish authenticity. Just as physical props prompt imagining a fictional world, so too does a page in a comic book or a scene in a movie. Thus, it is not just that the homemade Disney depicted attractions, but also that these attractions themselves served as props for individual friends and families to play together. So he's thinking about this concept of make-believe. And we sort of skip over or lose the fact that he's describing not just pretend, which it's often seen as synonymous with, but an activity where we make believe, where fans construct believable context for each other. And rather than thinking of this, as often it's described, as the willing suspension of disbelief, he's encouraging us to think of the active production of belief, to make believe. And I think that's true of many of the things that I experienced when I was in fandom in China. Next. So here we see, this is a space of a mall. There's a mural there on glass. And this young woman came and posed for a picture. And it's as if she knew exactly what she needed to wear, how she needed to behave to get the perfect picture in relation to this backdrop. So she is performing in costume for her friends who are taking the picture that will then appear on social media. Next slide. Here, this is a screening I went to of the first Slam Dunk summer ago, that people brought the red thunder sticks and acted as if the basketball game, which is the central feature of the entire film, as if the basketball game was an actual game unfolding in real time, and the outcome was left undetermined yet. So it was as if we were at a ball game. And so I had this immersive experience. Most of those people probably had seen the film before. I was seeing it for the first time, but it created for each other a greater sense of engagement, participation, immersion in this film. Next slide. You know, I was fascinated by the phenomenon of high school students who come from school and show up at the local mall in cosplay almost every day, right? This comes a subculture or a lifestyle that transforms the everyday space at the mall into something more fantastic, like we see in the setting here. Next slide. We see in supporting this is small scale entrepreneurs, what Angela McRobbie would call subcultural entrepreneurs, what I'm calling in this case fan entrepreneurs. We're producing products that are sold to fans in support of their fan participation. Next slide. And we see all kinds of these young women, particularly, who are making their living off of the subculture and supplying it with what it needs for them to perform fan identities for each other and create this process of making believe. Next slide. This is a meeting of fans of an Otami game, and you can sort of see the costume, the setting, the way in which this is set up for them to perform a particular romantic relationship with these game characters. Next slide. We see some more. We'll just keep clicking through these. Next. But the biggest place I saw was for this kind of fan engagement and participation is Disneyland, Shanghai Disneyland, which functions, the animatronic rides function as settings for fan performances. And the amount of subcultural garb, the sense of this main street as a promenade where people show off their costumes to each other, make it central. And when I talk to the executives at the park, they say, yes, we were unexpected to us just how much hunger there was in China for a place where people could go and dress up and show off costumes to each other. And that's been a central part of Shanghai Disney from the very beginning. So let's just click through some of these. Next. Next. And then this is me in Korea, but there are also in Korea spaces for dressing up, for performing, but there the relationship of fan to idol is much more pronounced than it was in my experience in Shanghai. Next slide. So there are these fantastical spaces, these imaginary homelands where we can go and experience the culture of K-pop. And that's me sort of all in pink, enjoying the pinkness and the kind of softness of this space. Next slide. You know, people say you make jokes about dancing, about architecture, but this is architecture about dance. Two of the monuments created in Seoul for K-pop, and specifically in this case, Psy's song, Gangnam Style. Right, next slide. one of the stores that we were at in the sort of central section of Seoul actually has a place where you can set your cell phone camera and record the unboxing of a music album there. And the music album comes with stickers and post picture cards and all kinds of other things that are part of the phenomenon of the music, right? Next slide. And the spaces where the music is sold have a similar kind of overlay of different media processes and practices that are extension of the kind of material in the box. You're now in a multimedia immersive environment. Next slide. This is on a subway. There were signs and pictures. Fans buy billboards of their favorite idols and then stick posters on them, commenting to the idol. They're there for the idol to see, but they're also there for the fans to see. And that's an extension of the idol culture into the public spaces of Seoul. Next slide. And then, of course, you have cloth dolls as a central feature of the fan culture of K-pop. And they have these environments where you can go and pose your doll to take pictures. And I saw women in their 30s and 40s grooming their cloth dolls and taking pictures in these various fantasy environments as if the doll has gone on vacation too. Next slide. And then you can take pictures, photo booths. This particular photo booth that my picture is in, one of the two women there is as a pop idol who wasn't physically there in the space, but is overlaid over our picture. So we get to pretend together that we're engaged with this idol in real time and space. Next slide. And then there's all kinds of paraphernalia, including that's me with my G idol light stick that I bought on this trip this summer and is a new object for me. But just the sheer range of objects tied to this fandom that are for sale in the shops in Seoul really fascinate me because they're all interfaces with an imaginary relationship with one's idol. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk briefly about another of our research groups. This one is focused on sartorial fandom, that is clothing and fandom. And their first project is on Hanfu, Hanbok, cultural confidence, fan nationalism, the ways in which historic cosplay functions in East Asia. And as you'll see here, we have Yang Wang from Shanghai University, Tierra Wilson from USC, Yusha Zhang from Korean University, and Pauline Makalat who is from Thailand, but is now at the University of Southern California. So this shows the kind of multinational, multicultural focus of our research process. Okay, next slide. So these are some pictures I took of Hanfu cosplay in China on my first trip there. This is in one of the water villages, but you get a sense of just there are lots and lots of little shops there that people are renting costumes from. Next slide. This is us on our last trip. There's me doing Hanfu along with both the Chinese students involved and the American students involved in our trip earlier this summer. So Hanfu is a kind of historic fashion. And then we see here, this is a woman in, next slide, woman in the high fashion district of Shanghai whose clothing clearly are influenced by Hanfu style, but has become more modernized and more fashion forward version of the kind of cosplay we've seen elsewhere. Next slide. This is what I saw when I went to Korea the first time. I showed up at this place and there were hundreds of people of all ages dressed in these historic costumes. And that's because you get free admission to the park if you show up dressed in hanbok. Okay, next. And we see here that some of the cloth dolls that I spotted this summer also dressed in hanbok or hanfu, depending on which country we're visiting. This is hanbok dolls from South Korea. Next slide. So there are culture days in China and elsewhere around the world now where people are encouraged to show up in traditional clothing, have the pictures taken. with it, post them on social media and so forth. And there's a lot of debate. Is this, this seems to have started by young women who were attracted to the style of classical periods, but that's now being actively encouraged by the government, which is curious because it represents a return to these historic periods that were actively prohibited during the Maoist Cultural Revolution. You would be punished if you were nostalgic for the feudal or imperial eras of Chinese history. Now it is just a given thing that allows the government to build up cultural confidence as a stepping stone toward certain kinds of nationalism in both Korea and in China. Next slide. Korea is marketed itself as imagine your Korea. And it's interesting to think about the work done by the word imagined, what it means to construct your Korea if you're not Korean. But one of the features of coming to Korea, they're now advertising heavily, is hanbok, dressing in hanbok. In America, that might be seen as cultural appropriation. In Korea, it's seen as a sign of respect for the indigenous cultures there. Next slide. So again, we can see it on one hand, a kind of cosmopolitanism as we are trying on each other's clothes, as we're imagining our relationship with these other cultures. It's breaking down the barriers between groups of people. Next slide. But it is also tied to nationalism, right? A sense of pride, of recovering your cultural heritage, of presenting itself to the world. Here we see an image of the China group Little Pink that has been very strongly connecting fandom with nationalism. Okay, next slide. So we see instances where an idol, in this case, a Korean woman is wearing a phoenix, which she thinks is a Korean symbol, but many of her Chinese fans were upset because they saw it as a Chinese symbol. And given the history of conquest and trade, it's not unexpected we will see lots of overlapping symbols between the two countries, but the response is not to embrace this, but to be angry that one's cultural heritage is being taken away when it is claimed by another country. Next slide. There was a lot of controversy around the film Turning Red, the Disney film, which is theoretically about Chinese culture. There was concern that it would trivialize Chinese cultural symbols and dress. Clothing is really central to it. Next slide. We kind of see Chinese styles of fashion being reproduced by this filmmaker who was Chinese Canadian by birth and ethnicity. And there was a lot of uncertainty because Disney in the past has, for example, the film Aladdin ends with a Bollywood number, which has nothing to do with this Arabian setting, but is imposed from another ethnic group on it. And so this question of whether Disney is going to get it right or not, but there's also enormous desire for Disney to tell stories which introduce Chinese and Korean princesses. Next slide. So we see, this is a kind of social media practice now of imagining, Korean or Japanese versions of the Disney princesses. So we see a cute kid in a costume there. Next slide. And we see Tiana as a Korean girl. Next slide. We see Snow White as a Korean girl. And then you start to see the kind of attempts to do Disney style animation of favorite K-dramas as a way of modeling what a more Disney style of Korean culture might look like. Next slide. And we see some good example. This is a Hanfu version of the Disney princesses that someone produced in China and spread through social media. Next slide. These are some examples of Hanfu versions of Snow White, which is a whole thing I discovered while I was there. Beautiful costumes, but blurring the boundary between Disney and historical Hanfu. Next slide. Another example. I think these are Japanese versions of Snow White and little kind of Lolita. So I'm ending just to shut things down, because I certainly have not exhausted the range of things we might talk about. I wanted to say now here in the US, this week has been announced a active fan organization called Heroes for Harris that are using the power of fan imaginaries to work for getting the vote out in our big election in November. And they're going to do a huge online Comic-Con for Kamala that will bring A-list celebrities from Marvel movies and comic book creators, showrunners, directors together to create an event where fans can hear from their favorite creators and then break into groups where they do things to organize for social change. And it's just an extension of what's taking place in fandom in the US that is a very topical example for us this week. And I thought I'd close with that reference that this is part of what's going on in my world. With that, I wrap things up. And happy to address questions now or later, whatever. I'm not hearing you. Let me see if I can, did the volume get turned off here, or should be able to hear you? Okay, it looks like it's on. Try again. All right, I'm still not hearing you. You must be muted on your side.
Oh, thank you so much.
Here we go.
We can move on to the next talk, and then we will
Okay.
do Q&A all together.
Sounds great. Hey, good to see you, Ringo.
By
And
Zoom.
Okay, while the speakers are setting up, may I introduce joining us in here is a PhD student from USA, Kedi Zhou, from the Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California, and Xinyue Zhang, a PhD candidate in the translation program at the School of Chinese of HKU. And they will talk for nearly half an hour, and then we'll be joined by our discussant, Professor Santiago Tristova. She's a writer, researcher, thinker, speaker, and doer. She is an expert in mixed research method, online learning, media literacy, popular culture, performance, new media, and globalization. And she is currently work on the research project on civic imagination at the University of Southern California. Kedi and Xinyue, the floor is yours.
So thank you everyone for being here virtually and in person. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending whichever time zone you are in. So hi everyone, my name is Kedi and I'm a PhD student at USC Annenberg.
Hi everyone, my name is Xinyue. I'm a PhD candidate here at Hong Kong U from School of Chinese.
So today we are going to share our ongoing research on Narcissistic. My God, I love it. Understanding fans' subjective well-being in K-pop random play dance. So anyone is a K-pop fan here? Nobody's K-pop fan. Oh yeah. Okay, so if you're a K-pop fan, you probably know where this title came from. So this is a very famous Love Dive IVE song, which we picked the title not only because it is a very well-received popular song that K-pop random play dancers love, and also it might partially reflect the nature of why people participate in this event. But most importantly, we have a IVE mom fan here, so that's why we use this topic as a title. So before we start, we want to make some acknowledgement. First of all, we want to thank Dr. Dingkun Wang and for inviting us, and the School of Chinese here at Hong Kong U for organizing everything. We also want to thank the Annenberg School of Communication for funding this project. And importantly, we want to thank our collaborator, Yuqi Yang, who's joining us virtually right now because she's in Los Angeles. She's our collaborator and contributes significantly to our program, as well as Tracy Zhang and Kevin Zhou, who has been accompanied us through the whole research journey. So for most of the people here who's not a K-pop fan, the first question actually came to what is K-pop random play dance? So K-pop random dance is a public event where a bunch of young people would dance to a mix of K-pop highlights, songs highlights, stitched together and played out loud in public. So people will usually stand in a square or a circle, and then there's music. So if they can recognize the music and make sure that they know the choreography, they will just go up and dance to the music. So this event, actually, the earliest documentation of this was in 2015 in Seoul, South Korea, which usually lasted 1 to 2 hours. But specifically in the context of China, as we were doing ethnography over the past 2 summers, there's an emerging activity called roadshow, 路演, which is increasingly integrated into the K-pop random dance. 路演, different from the randomness of K-pop random dance, is actually stage performance where the young people would follow the exact original choreography of the K-pop song they pick, and then they will also dress the same to mimic the original performance dressing style. So to better illustrate what K-pop dance is, we have some videos prepared here. Henry, would you do this? So the first one was actually in Hong Kong, like last year. So here we go.
We have no sound.
Sorry, I might need to share screen again. Sorry, I started over.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So this is an example of mostly girl group performances. And the other example that we prepared is actually 3 weeks ago, based in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, which was right after the K-pop concert, which is held annually in Los Angeles. And this is right after the concert's over and outside of the venue.
3, 2, 1.
One.
2,
This is good. Yeah, so it's quite obvious that more people would dance to. So more people would actually be dancing to the girl group band song compared to boy group, because some of our participants have argued that the boy group is actually harder than girl group songs because it's more tiring. But we can debate that. So essentially, K-pop random playdance has become such a global phenomenon. So if you ever get a chance to go on YouTube and type in K-pop random playdance, you'll actually see millions of different videos documenting the events held across almost all the major cities across the world, from Europe, North America, East Asia, South Asia, to some of the more like less well-known countries like Mongolia. So you will see all of the young people all across the world were coming together and dance to this event. And these videos have received millions of likes and reviews, also are updated on a daily basis. So I started this project because I was taking a group psychology communication class, and as a K-pop fan myself and also a beginner hip-hop lover, I was really interested why and how such a fan activity like K-pop random playdance would draw so many attention and gain popularity among the young people. So I turned to the concept of subjective well-being. So subjective well-being, which is different from the general well-being, is more focusing on how people subjectively perceive. So it's different from giving you a measurement objectively. And for example, if you receive more than $500,000 a year, you have no problem with their well-being. So it's nothing like that. It's like how people voluntarily perceive and evaluate their own happiness. So based on that, we ask, how does K-pop random playdance impact the subjective well-being of its participants? And the conceptual model that we draw from is a psychological model, which is built by Newman and his colleagues in 2014, which is called drama model. It has one more M compared to the aespa drama song. If you're a K-pop fan and if you're an aespa fan, you know that. But this is actually a model that examines the relationship between leisure and subjective well-being, how leisure activity engagement in leisures will contribute to people's subjective well-being. So Newman and his colleagues identified 5 primary psychological mechanisms. The first one is detachment and recovery, which is a time spent outside of work in leisure. And the second is autonomy, which is if one has willingly to participate, there are motivations in participating in a leisure activity. And the third one is mastery, which is the effort you put in and the betterment of skills you have in leisure activity. And the fourth one is called meaning, which is if you have gained something important or valuable through your leisure engagement. And the fifth one is affiliation, which is also the most important mechanism according to Newman. So affiliation is the sense of love, belongingness, and social support that you received and experienced by engaging with leisure activity. So this model actually offers a outline how leisure will contribute to subjective well-being. And we now turn to the methods we employed to explore how these mechanisms have been manifested in practice.
So next, I will explain and talk about the methodology we use in our research. Like many other studies in this field, we primarily employed ethnography as a line space with our research objectives. Our approach involved participant observation and over 30 interviews, and alongside with lurking in online community of K-pop random and dance. For online, our exploration began by starting to watch a lot of dance videos uploaded online, both full recordings and also fan cams. This is a kind of recordings that only focus on one member, single member among the group. And we read all the comments download below the videos. This is something we started to do way before we officially started this research. And second, we joined dozens of local WeChat groups, typically administered by different kinds of separate K-pop random dance organizers. So these organizers, they disseminate their event details in this WeChat group, and then dancers assemble roadshow teams for their chosen songs. So we established connection with about 70 participants, K-pop random dance participants. And let me tell you, they post a lot. They post a lot on their personal accounts, much more frequently and much more emotionally, which give us very precious lenses to observe and understand their daily social interaction. And also, as ethnography and participant observation, being physically present at events was paramount for us. Our fieldwork was multi-sided, extending beyond our home bases to many cities across the country. So in this summer, we went to like Beijing, Nanjing, Wuhan, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, Zhongshan, and of course Shanghai and Hong Kong. Even when Yuxi, one of our collaborators, was in Australia this year for this year's ICA conference, she witnessed K-pop random dance events held in Melbourne. So these cities encompass a spectrum from first tier to third tier cities with varying levels of K-pop popularity and dance culture. So while the fundamental formulation of K-pop random dance remain consistent, there are distinctions in atmosphere or practical norms and conventions of these events and also song preferences. In future, we plan to include more cities across the globe. So Sorry, yeah. So in total, we went to about 30 K-pop random dance events of varying scales. They're held on campus or in shopping centers, shopping malls, and outdoor. This immersive approach allowed us to hear the music and also feel the energy that cannot be experienced through the screen. And more, we can observe those nuanced interactions and dynamics that happen off the stage. Furthermore, it is noteworthy that two of our researchers, they are actively learning dance so they can better engage and integrate into the community. That is Kedi and Yuqi. So in terms of interviews, it is the primary method for our data collection. We design our questions based on the drama model we draw from, and we recruited participants through posting on online platforms and also introduction by gatekeepers. To date, we have conducted 31 interviews, averaging about 1 hour each. The demographic diversity of our respondents is crucial for ensuring representativeness. So regarding gender distribution, our research identified 26 women and 5 men, and a relatively higher proportion of people who self-identify as queer people. It is aligned with the K-pop random dance practice in general that more female participants engage. So due to ethical constraints, we didn't interview any minors, but our interviewees, their age range from just turning 18 to 27, with an average age of 21, which also reflect the youthful characteristic of this subculture. So in fact, based on our observation, also from our informants, the participants, they can range from elementary school students to individuals in their 50s, but overall, teenagers constitute the majority. So most of our participants, they are amateur students, although a few are highly trained dancers, some at the levels of instructors already. And we also interviewed some formal idols. So they're mostly students with educational backgrounds ranging from vocational high school to normal high school, from undergraduate to postgraduate and even doctoral degrees. There are 6 people already employed, so they're workers in diverse fields. Some are newcomers to K-pop random dance, while others have been involved since 2019, making it a very regular weekend pastime. Notably, there's one participant who have attended over 200 events. So he has been taking K-pop random dance as an integral part of his daily life. These very experienced and seasoned participants was also an event organizer. So in fact, we have interviewed two very senior event organizers and more casual and avid fan organizers. It is very interesting in K-pop random dance then more and more minors and like middle school students, they became organizers of some very large scale public events. Which blurs the line between participants and organization, or it is similar to the blurring the line of users and consumers. But still, there's significant divergence in terms of their motivations and perspectives for different roles. So in a nutshell, our ethnography about K-pop random dance, its culture and its community have been very rich and eye-opening. So stay tuned as we dive deeper into the materials and break down how subjective well-being can be influenced by the 5 psychological mechanisms. And I will share the preliminary findings of the first 3 psychological mechanisms, and then Kedi will wrap up with the rest 2 and provide more reflective insights. All right, so the first psychological mechanism is called detachment recovery. This mechanism emphasizes the improvement of subjective well-being through detachment from work and allowing time for recovery. So one of our participants says that if I don't have
this kind of leisure activity, K-pop random dance outside work, I feel lifeless. But once this activity occurs, I feel that my whole energy can be released here. It's kind of like a utopia, an escape from real life. In the K-pop random dance on the road show, you feel like an idol. But when you're working, you're just a worker. You're miserable.
Thanks, Kedi. So of course we can see that so this is a miserable worker as I do. But of course people it is not only thing that people want to detach from. So it can be any kind of stressful situation, but overall among our interviewees, workers, those who are already employed, they report more relief again through participating in K-pop random dance. Right. The next mechanism, moving on to autonomy, which is a fundamental aspect of leisure. So it is pretty simple that if you are forced into an activity, chances are you won't find joy in it. On the contrary, voluntary engagement brings autonomy and also motivations. Here, we witness a bunch of different motivations from our participants. Some just find K-pop random dance relaxing and enjoyable, so just basically leisure, while others aims to get a nice fan cam videos after their performance, and then they can upload it. They can upload on the internet and get more online recognition. Additionally, some tended to socialize or just view it as a kind of sport or exercise. Positive feedback loop plays a crucial part in sustaining participation and also creating a good cycle, a virtuous cycle. So a subtle yet prevalent thing emerged as many interviewees highlight their introduction to and engagement in this event during the pandemic period. Those who begin before or after the COVID-19 also acknowledge its significant impact. So as one participant said that she first heard about this event in 2020, but however she didn't participate that much because there were any opportunities during that time because of the pandemic restrictions on social gatherings. So the second time was already in 2023. At that time, the pandemic was a bit more stable and the restrictions have been lifted. Yeah. Moving on to the third mechanism, mastery, which focuses on skill improvement and achieving success in a lecture activity. So dance is different because different from say jogging, this kind of activities. Once you can work, you probably can jog, whether slow or fast, bad or good or bad. So even for those gifted, dance is an activity that requires specialized learning and practice. So in our studies, we found that most participants, they had previous dance experience before they first attend K-pop random dance. When they were children, their parents would send them to after-school interest class to learn dance, but typically in other types of dances such as jazz or old schools or hip-hop. So while these K-pop random dance participants, they usually do not aspire to be professional levels, they still spend a lot of time in practicing and rehearsals. This dedication and commitment into this activity yields a profound sense of accomplishment, self-realization, and personal growth. Notably, mastery is perceived differently in the context of K-pop random dance. So here, because K-pop random dance dancers, they are following the original choreography in the K-pop music videos, the creativity or difficulty of the dance are not of their first concerns. However, synchronization and timing are still essential, but they are less, but not in the traditional sense that you need to be in sync with music. It is more about being in sync with your teammates. So for K-pop random dance, especially on the road shows, uniformity is the most important thing. And also aesthetic presentation and showmanship, including the facial expressions and outfits, do matter a lot. I think this is apparently influenced by the emphasis on visuality of K-pop culture. Since participants aspire to be like their idols in every sense, so crowd appeal, or to be more specific, fan chant or shouting or cheers among the audience are very significant to their subjective well-being.
So meaning refers to if one has gained anything important or valuable through the participation. So there are actually multiple things that our participants have highlighted, such as the organization skill that they get to improve when they became the leadership in organizing a roadshow. But there's one specific thing that we want to highlight here is the sense of being an idol. So as quoted here, said by one of our participants, I really love the feeling of being an idol. Random dance is a way for me as an ordinary person to experience that idol feeling. When I was standing on the stage and performing a song, I'll pick a girl in the audience to make eye contact, or I look into my camera. There are many girls who can really provide emotional support. When I was dancing to Maniac, there was a girl watching me, so I smiled at her and she immediately waved and cheered for me. I felt so happy. I really love that feeling. So having a stage like K-pop random play dance for everyday people was actually allowing them to experience the thrill and emotional connection of performing like an idol, even if just for a minute. The exact interaction between the performance and the audiences actually brings a powerful sense of validation to the performers, amplifying the positive feelings such as joy coming from these shared cultural experiences. And the last but not least, affiliation. So affiliation was often brought up by our participants because of their sense of experiences of love and belongingness and social support that they received. So we observed that our participants can be really selective about the relationships they try to maintain within the K-pop random dance community, because it's a really large community, both local-wise and nation-wise. So once people have formed a stable relationship, which is like they have a WeChat group with 5 or less people, their networks within the community became more stable. However, through these regular gatherings, people who share a passion for K-pop can connect, form relationships, and create a supportive network. As our participant says, it feels a lot like being part of a college class or a close-knit group. So the sense of affiliation extends beyond the dance floor at the scene and to bond with each other in everyday life and experience being part of something special. But also, affiliation not only helps to calculate positive feelings, but also it helps to inhabit negative feelings, such as the sense of loneliness and isolation. So as one of our courageous respondents said, anyways, without K-pop random play dance, I would just be like a dead body. Now I'm no longer a corpse, I'm alive again. So on that note, echoing the drama model, which state that after a major change in life, people are more willing to participate in leisure to cope with change and well-being. We actually want to propose that COVID might be an important timing where K-pop was both K-pop and K-pop random play dance gained increasing popularity. So we probably heard a lot of arguments have already been made in terms of K-pop. We also want to extend that to K-pop random play dance as well. So even though we don't talk about zero COVID policy, that's often nowadays, but we want to say that it's actually causing a significant impact and leaving a trace on why people choose to join. And secondly, certain leisure events can be more beneficial to subjective well-being because they fulfill multiple psychological needs. So compared to other less engaging fan activities or leisure activities, such as watching a movie alone or jogging or taking a nap, K-pop random play dance might be more beneficial to people's well-being and better received because they can fulfill multiple psychological needs of its participants, for example, including their social needs, their desire for self-performance, and their detachment from work. And thirdly, specific subpopulations can gain more benefits from a particular form of leisure. So specifically in our context, we want to highlight how queer people consider the space of K-pop random play dance as utopia. So one of my participants actually said that sexual minorities are the majorities within the K-pop random dance community. So it not actually surprising me, but I feel like many queer people who self-identify as either queer or gender fluid, do we have gender fluid, or like bisexual or gay or lesbian, actually consider this space as comfortable and safe to bond with each other who share similar identities and to express themselves with the full performativity. And finally, some participants might respond more positively to leisure experiences, leading to a greater enhancement of their subjective well-being. So we interviewed people who have multiple roles in K-pop random play dance, such as people who's an organizer and a participant at the same time. We also have lots of influencer and a participant at the same time. So these people might have more diverse experiences compared to just an ordinary participant. But this might sound plain, but we also want to argue that this could act counteractively, which means that in times of crisis, for example, when there's a like large-scale pushback of nationalist expression against certain K-pop group, these people also face higher risk in terms of how do they manage their communication with other participants, stuff like that. So on that note, this is still an ongoing research, so it's just some of the findings that we share. So let me know what you think and any feedback, suggestions. And finally, if you can recognize any of the album cover here, you can talk to me and we can be best friends. And anyways, I'll turn to Sangeeta, who's here right now, and to yes.
Thank you so much, Kedi, and everybody, Xinyue, for this great presentation. I have to say, I just got very educated on K-pop random dance, so I'm processing all this. But what I'm hoping we can do is have a little bit of a conversation, right? I'm happy to bring in some thoughts that I have as well, but I'd like to just have some, because you said this is ongoing work. So in that spirit, let's have a conversation about what I heard. I thought your frame was really fascinating. It was an unexpected framing for me a little bit, because I don't know, knowing both of you or knowing at least Kedi, I wasn't expecting the psychological angle.
I know. Me neither.
You neither? Okay, well, that's good. Well, but for me, it was really interesting to think about it this way. And what I was hoping for, what I really would like to see more of, I think, was the physical well-being, because it seems obvious to me that, when we're talking, those two pieces are connected. And so what I would like to offer here is maybe a way to think through the embodied dimensions of K-pop random dance, and then what I was seeing in the few examples you were showing me. So again, I'm coming to this as a complete novice. So I have, as you were speaking, I left some of the videos playing. So that's all I know, right? So it's not, don't take any of these observations with with any weight at all. But for me, I think what would be really interesting to look at is to think about really why people want to move this way, why they want to move this way together, and what kinds of meanings they create through the movements they do together in particular physical spaces. So, because of course, at first glance, when you first played the videos, it reminded me of, flash mobs from the early 2000s. But when you described the practice around it, it's actually very different from what I associate with flash mobs, which were just, if, in case people weren't familiar with flash mobs of that period, they were generally staged to look like spontaneous performances in physical spaces that would not normally have these performances. But in fact, they were heavily pre-prepared. So there wasn't actually anything really spontaneous about them at all. So they would involve music, and then it would just seem like bystanders start dancing, and then eventually it moves into a performance, right? And so so I looked at that process of preparation and leading up to the performances specifically for Bollywood dance, but it's very different from what you're describing. And yet it struck me that this idea of claiming space through embodiment with people around you who share a particular affinity or a particular fandom seems to be very similar. And you point out that there's probably a reason why this happened post-COVID, or why it became so popular post-COVID. And you didn't name this, so I'm just going to name it, that my hypothesis would be that we were denied public spaces and we were denied embodiment. Our bodies were something we were afraid of. We were afraid of other people's bodies. We were afraid of people breathing close to us, right? So there might be something there as well to look at. Otherwise, another way to parse this out would be the ways in which we think about belonging through movement. And what was striking to me there when you were describing the practice was that you don't need to have prepared with others, but you need to have learned the dances from the original sequence. And then as we were watching those sequences, you could see that people stepped out, right, when they didn't know the movement, and that it was about performing the dance as close to the original in a frontal configuration with a camera, right? And that feels really important in terms of how participation is constituted and what it means to belong in that community. Because of all and you even mentioned that the dance skill seems to be a prerequisite, and that's something to think about, right? You talk to people who are part of this community. What about K-pop dancers who couldn't perform at this level? Like, what does that mean, right? Do they still feel invited to participate? And if not, then what kind of space is this creating for people? And then I already kind of alluded to space and place. So the way staging it in particular cities, I don't know how this is uploaded, like if it's labeled by, because I see it usually when we quickly Googled while you were speaking, we see an identification of the place where the random dance is taking place. So that to me is very interesting because you have the physical experience of it, but then you also have, just as importantly, the online distribution of it. And it's clearly staged for that. And then what does that mean when you start to see this global circulation of multiple sites? And how does that then affect the sense of community that you're part of, that you're describing? Right. In addition to the practices that you were describing, which were around organizing and feeling connected and costume and all that. And then finally, I mean, I can't help but pause on the choreography piece, because that to me is the most different from some of the other dance genres that I'm familiar with. So if you think about dance battles around hip hop, or if you think about Bollywood, where choreography as an expression of my community's interpretation of the original content is the crucial piece. What you're describing here is actually quite different. I don't know, at least from where you described it, it's about perfecting your ability to perform the technique, expression, essentially the full embodying the idol's performances of it, right? But in community with others, to an audience of peers. And that to me feels really crucial to how meaning is created. And so when you talk about meaning in your analysis, you're talking about it largely, I think, on an individual level in terms of well-being, because you applied a psychological frame, which makes sense. But even pushing it more towards social psychology, I would be really curious about what we could learn about what are the deeper meanings that are created through this collective expression, when the point isn't to express yourself, or is it? Like, I don't know. And how does that then connect to this sense of my personal well-being, right? Because it might, to me, the subsuming of the self almost on one hand on the other hand, the expression of oneself and the sense of community around it feels like a really rich space to explore. And I'd love to see you think about that more, or maybe you already have thoughts about ways in which we might be thinking about this. So yeah, those were really the top line thoughts. I'd love to just have a conversation about, like, if anything sparked in what I said, maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah, of course. I love the comment on like specifically COVID in terms of how we were denying public space and public gathering. I feel like China might have a contrast experience with how COVID was managed worldwide, and people can definitely jump in and argue against me because I feel like the most intensive part was like Omicron and the virus before Omicron, when like restrictions was stricter abroad. Anyone want to jump in and support me or deny me? But like, but because of our zero COVID policy, K-pop random play dance is actually held very constantly in 2021. Where you think about it, it's actually a really chaotic time abroad, if I didn't remember it wrong. But after we have like a really strict time, right? And then after that is in 2023, when we were interviewing one of our organizers, he said that because COVID kind of harms the profits of the shopping malls that these K-pop random dances are usually held at. So people need like the leadership in the shopping malls wanted more people to host events like that, so that it attracts more attention and flow of people. So, but definitely like the deny of gathering, and like we don't want to grieve together, but we want to have something fun. We want to celebrate life in terms of instead of feeling sorry for the loss of life, is definitely something that might ground the whole narrative of K-pop random dance, especially explaining why this is getting so popular over the post-pandemic, during the pandemic. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think this economic connection is actually fascinating as well. Yeah. But it does feel to me like there's something about that, like there's a connection between the embodiment, so my body moving in a space and feeling joyful, and then moving with others and feeling in community with others. And then there's the performativity of it, which is another part, which is it's very frontal. I'm performing it for camera. I'm catching people's eye. They're acknowledging my skill or lack thereof. I don't know if you're connecting with, you're moving with other bodies, but you're not necessarily making eye contact with other dancers. And those are kind of three things that are happening within that performance that all relate to the physical experience of it. Yeah, so I think that there's something there that's worth exploring more in terms of how the specific practice of it leads to increased well-being, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Where are you thinking of taking it next?
I don't know. As you know, I have no background in psychology, so I'm so scared right now because I am so afraid of offending anyone or get rejected by anyone. But we'll see. But I feel like we might want to go further with the emphasis on queer people probably for the first paper, because yeah, like it's quite surprising because I've done interviews with other communities before, and I've never identified so many people who's been so honest with me about like I'm a gay or I'm a lesbian. But like the example that I just showed, where the girl really enjoyed the idol feeling, was like being a lesbian was like the second thing she told me when we first meet each other for 5 minutes. So she was like, I met my crush here at the random play dance. I lost my last girlfriend because she doesn't support me participating in random play dance. But all that dynamic is just so fascinating to me about how people can be so open and honest within the space, because she assumed that I'm part of the K-pop random community as well. So I'm not sure if I'm too old to know about people who's just turning 20 or something, but I feel like this is for me, it's rarely seen in the Chinese context, generally speaking. So, which is so fascinating to me. So I definitely want to take further in terms of queer performativity and something like that. Same with my interview. Xinyue just said same with my interview on Barbie fans. So okay, so we have multiple communities that are honest about their sexuality, which is awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's really interesting. I wonder, I mean, it feels to me like it relates to Henry. I don't remember exactly how he put it, but it was imagining, or imagined identities through imagining or something, of some sort of like layering of fictional worlds, right? Where you're finding an expression of yourself through you're connecting this fictional world to your identity in a way that
I
actually
was
allows
calling
you
them
to express
imagined.
yourself.
I
Yeah,
was
go ahead.
calling them imagined communities.
There you go.
So,
Yeah, because it feels like there's something like that going on as well, but it's like through the embodied practice, which I think also relates to what Henry was, the many pictures, right? Where Henry, all the people, they're effectively embodying their imagined practice through the
yes.
costume and through place. Do we have questions coming in from the audience? I wasn't paying. I was just so
Yes, I think we can move on to the Q&A. Feel yourself comfortable, you can either stay up there
Over
or
there.
okay. So now we can open the floor to the audiences in here or online. So if you are joining this event online, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. So oh, yes. Could you turn on the mic?
Can you hear clearly? Professor Jenkins, actually, regarding nationalism and fan culture, the fact is that many studies nowadays focus more on K-pop, but the fact is that Chinese J-pop fans, it means Japanese pop fans, are also a very noteworthy fan group.
Yes.
And because there is a deep nationalistic conflict between China and Japan, and it is kind of different between J-pop fans and ACG fans. Actually, the J-pop fans are more focused on the real people, the real Japanese stars, and the real Japanese stars will have their own action that showing some that make show some conflict between China and Japan, just like Taiwan problem or some other kinds nationalism problem. So I wonder if you have any knowledge about how to understand this part of fan base.
I think this is why my ultimate ambition for our research group is to be at least triangular. That is Japan, Korea, China, and to study them in relation to each other. Because I think my sense is that the American century, the Hollywood century, is over. And for the foreseeable future, these are the dominant media industries in the world, coupled with India. So understanding how they connect with each other seems really crucial. And as you say, the geopolitical histories of relations between these countries who have been fighting wars with each other for hundreds, if not thousands of years, who have immediate trauma in the older generations in relation to each other, who are policing boundaries online, as we talked about with Hanbok and Han Fu and so forth. This is something that's crucial to understand, and I think is how we're going to see new identities and new political alliances form. So what the cliche we hear in the West about China is that it's closed off, that anything that connects with these other cultures would be hidden from view. And that's why I was so startled to see 85-foot tall purple robot in the heart of Shanghai, is that they are openly embracing Japan and Japanese culture, even as I hear stories, say, of people wearing hanfu and getting harassed as if they were wearing a kimono and having people upset at them on buses and trains and so forth. So there's a lot going on there that I think needs to be understood. There's some great work coming out of Chinese scholars on some of these questions that we need to know in the West more fully. So part of what I want to do is amplify Chinese voices on these questions. But I also think we can learn from each other because fandom studies has been in the West longer and has a wider variety of tools. Looks like Alfred W.T. Lowe is asking a question to me. It says, thank you very much for your lovely picture shared with us. I'm working at the intersection of fandom and linguistics. Was wondering if ethnography is the best way to study fandom. Are there any other suggested methodologies you would deem desirable for studying fandom? Also, do you think studying fandom with quantitative design is necessary? Well, I should say, I'm working with Robert Kosnatz, who is one of my colleagues at USC, who's a founding figure in the study of what he calls netnography and consumer culture research. And we're doing a series of short books that we're self-publishing on Amazon, looking at different methodologies and conceptual frames for studying fandom. I think we're going to have the first 3 out in the fall and going from there. But altogether, there are 14 books that are roughly 60,000 words each that we've written. And it's all about the methodology, the theory of fandom studies. So over the next year and a half, we're going to be publishing them. And there's a lot there. But I don't think it's just ethnography. I think his idea of netnography is pretty interesting. I'm interested in visual anthropology as an extension of fandom studies, which is partially why so many pictures and why I'm taking so many pictures. But I think you could also think about cultural geography, say, which I'm very interested in as we think about locations of fandom. And it seems very important for thinking about fandom in Shanghai is the structure of the malls, where they're located, who goes to which mall, what objects, what's on sale in those malls, what space there is for fan entrepreneurs and so forth. So that's an important methodology. History's an important methodology. And we're seeing explosion of in the last decade of new work on historical investigations, archival histories, oral histories for understanding fandom. I don't think quantitative is necessary, but I think it's desirable. The challenge of doing anything quantitative in fandom is you're dealing with a semi-underground culture that doesn't have central structures that hold it together. So we have to define our terms before we can start counting things. And we're counting things in a context where, for a variety of reasons, a lot of the participants are hidden from view. So it's not intuitive to me how you get to quantitative studies of fandom, but I think it would be desirable to better understand what the numbers are, what the structures are. I think quantitative researchers have things to contribute, but you probably want to do so in a mixed method context where we work with more qualitative folks who can help locate and explain the logics of fandom, even as we're doing quantitative work to measure fandom and its consequences, say, on identity, to go back to Kedi and Ringo's paper.
Thank you.
I have a question for Professor Guo. So normally our understanding of the translation of subtitling is that it's intended for foreigners. But in the case you discussed, how the translation enhance the visibility of queer elements, are you implying that the intended readers are Chinese who can read English instead of non-Chinese readers?
combined with the Chinese subtitle actually give readers more ideas, more information about what's going on. So that's why I think, especially when I was looking at the videos, it's a lot of bullet subtitle demo on the top. People are saying, do you know how many times I have watched this video again and again and again? Because you can go back and chase, well, actually what the English was. So yeah, I like you point out this, like there's meaning, there's intentions, English subtitles were provided there for you to consume together with the Chinese.
Oh, hi again. Sorry, I have to say for the third time, you are my best friend now because you recognize all the album covers. But the model that we use is actually a summarization of more than 300 theories on how leisure activities will contribute to subjective well-being. But as they argue, there are three components of subjective well-being, which includes life satisfaction, positive feelings, and negative feelings. But the theories also said that they didn't specify which specific psychological mechanism will contribute to like a specific component, but more of like a generally speaking subjective well-being. So personally speaking, I feel like this is useful because it helps us to design our interview based on the different requirements for like, for example, concerning mastery, we were asking participants if they have like dancing experience, if they are trained dancers, and if they improve their skills while participating. And I feel like this is very useful and is validated because of the feedback. But I was also concerned about because of my lack of education in psychology. So how can I take this further? But definitely, I think this is a useful framework. Yes.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question for Professor Jenkins, and I wanted to express my grateful thanks for such a wonderful speech. And my question is about, we could say that besides K-pop and J-pop, we have to admit that there are a bunch of fans for American pop culture and European pop culture, for instance, like Taylor Swift, Coldplay, Harry Styles, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So yes, like I have noticed that since Taylor Swift didn't like launch his concert at China, a lot of Chinese fans, they flew far away, like flew all over the world to attend her concert. And like it's quite it's a really such a big activism on Chinese social media. So my question is about like such, we have to admit that right now there's a more potentially fierce conflict between Western world and Chinese or East Asian world. However, this fandom fluidity, like this kind of communication as a grassroots activism. Do you think such transcultural or transnational fandom communication can make any difference to nowadays, this more fierce, politically conflicts around the world? Yeah, thank you.
I think we're seeing, I've got to be careful how to answer this question, but we're seeing, I ended the talk with the Heroes for Harris example of very active fan activism here in the United States around the current election. And it seems that it's going to be a central part of it. I mean, we're still in the midst of the Democratic National Convention here this week, and we saw countless references to pop culture, which seem to be being used to court younger voters, both women who are largely in the Harris camp and young men who are largely in the Trump camp. But, there's a gender divide in America around those questions. Do I think that connecting with pop culture from elsewhere in the world could have a geopolitical effect? Absolutely. I think in these autocratic situations, we want to be looking at what change is possible at the cultural and social level. What change do everyday people have in their control? And one of them is the capacity for empathy, for imaginative connections, for reaching out to people elsewhere in the world and trying to understand the world from their perspective. Now, this shouldn't be one directional. When I was getting ready to go to China the first time last summer, wasn't first time, but my trip last summer, I asked for the list of 10 cult shows in China, and I watched the first episode of each of them, and I posted my reactions on Facebook. And I was really surprised how many of everyday people that I knew were watching some of these shows online, right? All of the top 10 that I was given were available with English subtitles on American media platforms. We're seeing, for example, Netflix has made the Three Body Problems, but the original Chinese series, Three Bodies, is available on Hulu here in the US. So America is as much part of the global shuffle I was talking about as China is, as Korea is, and so forth. We're consuming Chinese pop culture now. It's largely underground. It's not as visible in our culture as K-pop fandom or anime fandom might be, but I feel like it's one Squid Game away from being a really above ground phenomenon. And to some degree, the Three Body Problems has been that text. That's the killer app that people have been engaging with. And that's leading them back to aspects of Chinese history and to feel a greater understanding of the Chinese perspective on the world. I think Wandering Earth has also been a really pivotal text. But many of the people I were in high school with, the women from high school, were really into Princesses in the Palace, for example. And the historical fictions, the serial fictions out of China have generated that kind of response. So I don't know as much about Taylor Swift as I might. I know some things, but I don't really know the situation of Taylor Swift in China. But it's, I think, part of this larger process of we're consuming each other's culture. And if we do that enough, we start to understand who we each are and how we connect. And it's going to be a generational shift, I think, away from the fear of other cultures that shapes almost every country in the world right now, and hopefully toward a greater connection and engagement as the 20-something fan women that I've met in China and in the US and so forth come of age and gain power. Maybe there's a different attitude toward global culture than we've seen before.
Yes, thank you so much for your answer. And like Taylor Swift right now in China is as those most influential pop stars. And
definitely here too, for sure. But
Yes, and like her fans were acting like these culture mediators, like they popularize, you know, a lot of like American culture, so as other like European stars, not or American stars, not just as Taylor Swift, and also those TV series, like fans of American TV series, they also bring a lot of like American culture to Chinese, like to popularize it and make
Yeah.
it flow. Yeah. Thank you.
So we've been very interested in Disney and in Barbie as kind of American phenomena that have had deep roots in China. And I mean, have Chinese fans have developed really strong relations to, particularly if we lump Marvel into the Disney camp. I'm fascinated though by Lotsa Bear, the strawberry bear, who seems to be a huge cult phenomenon in China. Everywhere I went in Shanghai, you could see those bears. And yet in America, that's a second, you know, it's the Toy Story 3 villain that we don't really think that much about. It's not been an important cultural resource in the US, but it has become one in China. And I, you know, my student at Shanghai University, Lenore, has written something for my blog that's coming out later. And she's arguing that, first of all, a lot of Chinese people don't know where the bear is, that they're used to products that are cool and cute that don't necessarily have stories attached. So the bear is taking on a life of its own outside of the Toy Story universe. And B, those people who do follow Toy Story are sympathetic to his struggles because the bear had felt neglected, abandoned, and so forth. And that's what made it a villain. And somehow that's a source of some identification and emotional connection for Chinese fans that are different from what that bear means elsewhere. So it's not just that we're trading culture, but we're seeing things in each other's culture that we might not have, that we don't recognize in our own culture, that's significant somewhere else as a resource for another group. And I'd say Lotsa Bear is a classic example of that.
Yes, thank you so much.
Any more questions? Well, okay. Maybe we'll start from you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your present for all your presenters. And I have basically two questions. One for Professor Jenkins, the other for Kedi and Xinyue. So for Professor Jenkins, I'm wondering if you can more clarify about your idea about imaginary homelands. So because it seems like from the term imaginary homeland is kind of connection with the word homelands. I mean homelands in reality. So it seems like there's a tension between imaginary homeland and homeland. So is that something like we're kind of saying that we're not satisfied with reality, and so we're seeking for some imaginary world, or we could see some fandom communities that are actually trying to make our reality more like imaginary homeland. And I think that is also a link to my question to Kedi and Xinyue. So how do you think we say the K-pop France? So it seems like, according to you, stories like they're imaginary a stage. So basically, we could say this also imaginary. I don't know if it is right to say imaginary homeland or anyway imaginary space, where they're just pretending they were not pretending. They're just thinking they're like on a stage and with the audience. But from your material you showed to us, it feels like there's this shared kind of idea saying that they're not satisfied with reality, so they feel void in works and want to seeking for some meanings through their K-pop community. So just wondering, do you agree with this or anything you want to add on this? Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I would say I don't think reality is sufficient for most of us. You know, our everyday lives aren't satisfying. There are real problems that we're facing. And fantasy may give us resources to think about those problems from a different vantage point. So when I use the term imaginary homelands, I am describing something that is close to us, like the Bradbury building is 5 blocks down the street from where I am right now, or that park in Shanghai is very close to where that student lived. It is something in our intimate environment, which nevertheless has an element of the fantastic about it. And I think it's interesting that park that has the Japanese pop culture icons is we're simultaneously having a playful imaginary relationship to a giant robot from an anime series. And we're using it to think about Japan as a real place, but a place far away from us that we have an imaginary relationship to. And that's why I brought in Chinatowns and ethnic enclaves, is because they're also imaginary spaces, right? Benedict Anderson would say all communities are imaginary in the sense we're never going to know all the participants there. And so we have imaginary connections with each other that are very tangible, very real, have real social consequences. But I would say Chinatowns are imaginary ways of bridging between China and the US that were created and shaped by Chinese Americans as a way of performing their Chineseness to each other and to the general public. And that is also an imaginary space, even if they are ethnically, culturally Chinese, they're performing a Chineseness that doesn't really exist in China as a composite of different Chinese cultures and isn't necessarily the lived experience of their own lives. So that's kind of how I would get at it. It is real, but it is hyper real, and it goes beyond the real into a space that allows us to look at our environment in a different way, for these spaces to be charged with meaning. And so I don't see it as about the inadequacy of the dreamer. I see it as about the dreamer's critique of the inadequacy of the everyday life to satisfy and meet their needs. And so where we see vivid utopian dreams, we can use it as a vantage point to critique what's not working about the reality as most of us experience it. All right, Kedi, did your team want to say something about it? He had the question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, now I hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your question, Zixuan. And I feel like K-pop random play dance is definitely an imaginary homeland, as one of my respondents used the exact word homeland to describe her sense of belongingness toward this. But different from like the super giant architecture that Henry was just describing in a park in Shanghai, the space that K-pop random play dance can be less material in some sense, because usually you walk past a shopping mall and you don't feel like that circle where usually just a plant stays there, could be actually a stage for young people to gather together and then, dance together. So it's like, it's kind of like what Henry was saying, like it might feel normal for some people, but in terms of people who are actually within this community, this is so much different. But also, this is not addressed in our presentation, but I feel like the materiality part of K-pop random play dance is also so much highlighted. So thinking about the efforts you're gonna pay, like some of our respondents actually make their own clothes. They don't buy it because like their clothes, they can't find the exact matching style online, so they have to make their own clothes, even though they never learned how to design. But also the money that you have to pay for a dancing studio, and when you are going on a road show, you have to pay for the rehearsal room, and then you have to pay for milk tea or coffee sometimes. So all that materiality, and also our organizers have addressed how they have to sometimes pay money to get the arena for hosting the event. Sometimes the shopping mall pay them money. So it sounds like imaginary homeland in terms of for the participants, but behind that, there's also a lot of material part that's still not like beyond imaginary, but it's like the physical thing that we need to address. So yeah.
If I may, could I add a little bit to the imaginary homelands? I think one area in which one area of study where imaginary homelands really shows up a lot, and it hasn't been mentioned here, is in diaspora studies, where we talk about imaginary homelands for people who have moved to a new location, so say moving from China to the United States permanently. And in that context, imaginary homelands refers to the moment when you're actually maybe breaking the relationship, where the distance has changed your relationship to the homeland you left behind. And in fact, the homeland you left behind is now imagined, because it may no longer exist in reality the way you remember it. Temporarily it may have shifted, in other ways. And so in fact, and you may then recreate that imaginary homeland physically in a new location. You may do that through creating events or finding community, or even as neighborhoods pop up in particular locations. And so the imaginary dimension of that is layered on top of how you relate to the homeland you left behind, which may no longer exist in the way that you remember it.
Good, thank you. Now we can let Fanxi ask. After that, we're gonna let Eddie ask from online.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you for your great talks. Well, first, I would like to give a short comment on our K-pop study by Kedi and Xinyue. I really like the part that someone said, I like the feeling of being an idol, not because of like the power, the attention, but just because I guess she wants to connect with any like ordinary people and like mutually provide like effective how to say that, like effective value, right? I really like this part, and I think from your study, we can like assume that this community of people is mainly like female and queer and working class people, like from the interviews, the data you collect. So I really like this part. I feel that it's kind of like a like ordinary people's like daily tactics to like deal with the pressure from our social structure that is heteronormative and patriarchy, like that. Yeah, I really like this part. And then I have a question for Henry about the popular culture product. Like nowadays, China is trying to use its popular culture product as a way of like culture output. Can I put it like that? So in these cultural products, we can see a lot of like I would say like values connect to them. Some of them are very conservative, very heteronormative, that serves actually the interest of the Chinese government. But these products are getting really popular all around the world, and I would like to know, do you have any thoughts on like the influence of this phenomenon? What kind of influence will have after these products become popular in different countries and regions all over the world? Thank you.
All right, before Henry answers that, I will adding from Fanxi, like I have a question for Dr. Guo as well, like because like the Untamed, Chen Qingling would it could be big, but because of the Chinese government's policy, cultural policy, kind of, it was on Netflix already, but it didn't turn as big as the squash game Yoyu Yoxi, I think, from Korea. So like just echoing Fanxi's question on like the cultural export and government policy. Do you have any thoughts on that? But we can go to Henry first.
Okay, no, well, I think yes, that the Untamed could have been a huge, much bigger global success than it was. It already was a huge global success. It still has fan followings that go really deep in the US. And I think that's part of what drew me in, because I got sucked into the controversy around the Untamed and the shutting down of archive of our own in China and so forth. People kept reaching out to me to comment on it. And finally, I said, I don't know enough about Chinese pop culture or Chinese fandom. I need to be on the ground to do it. And that's part of why I came to China a year ago and why I came back this year was strongly connected to the Untamed. But yeah, I don't think we know yet what the geopolitical effect is. We have these theories like soft power that I think are more nuanced theories than, say, the old cultural imperialism theses that were sort of dominant for a long time. We need to know what people feel an affinity to, how they're taking them up, what they're doing with them, what meanings they attach to them, what they do and don't understand about the context of their original production. Because often when I'm seeing a film from India or China or Korea, the nuances of the local politics are the first thing that drop off, right? And so I don't know, I didn't know when I first saw RRR that it was so inflected by Modi's politics and Hindu nationalism, because the reference points were lost on me. And it's the same, we saw I watched Twilight of the Warriors about the walled city in Hong Kong recently. And I can sort of, knowing what I know about the politics of contemporary Hong Kong, I can make some connections there. But I guarantee you a lot of people in the theater when I watched it didn't think of the walled city as a metaphor for Hong Kong itself, right? That's not necessarily the way they encountered it. They saw it as a lot of kickboxing, a lot of blade play, a lot of parkour, a lot of action. So I think it's possible to consume these things with minimal propagandistic functions, although they may build goodwill to China in an abstract sense. I'm not sure that the nuances of messaging of the nation state necessarily carry through for people who don't know that layer of the thing. On the other hand, when I watched Wandering Earth 2, I think for the first time I understood the appeal of a kind of long-term leadership structure like you have in China, that the national leader in that, the Chinese leader, is so calm, so steady, takes the long view, and is pit in that film against very fickle Americans who change their minds regularly. The subtext of politics, the comparison there between the US and China, I'm not ready to sign in on a Chinese political structure, but there's something that was very appealing to me about that representation of leadership, which led me to greater empathy for how other structures of governance might work. And in that sense, I do think that it changed some of the way I felt, if not thought, about China's political context.
I think it's a difficult question really to answer why Centennial is not as popular as the other one. First, I think it really depends on who you're asking. If you're asking my British student who has studied Chinese, they will say, oh, it's so popular. I love it so much. But if you ask somebody else, they say, what? And also, I think it's problematic to judge whether it's popular or not on Netflix, because Netflix is ultimately target mainstream audience who have very little knowledge, let's say, about China, Chinese culture.